All right, here we are. We got module 6 going on, and we are looking at flexibility. For this module, the majority of the tests and everything will be in our chapter 11, but most of the content that I'll be pulling from our book will be from chapter 12. So with flexibility, it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot of stuff I'm sure you guys already know, but we will go into like the definition of flexibility, the importance of flexibility, and how it's one of the main domains of fitness. And it's oftentimes a forgotten component in fitness in general. And it has its place not only as its own category, but how it actually has a halo effect to other things within fitness. So the book itself defines flexibility as a range of motion about a joint or a series of joints. And one can think of this in terms of a movement pattern like a bicep curl, which is single joint, or a golf swing, which is a series of joints that all work together to articulate to make a movement happen. Now, I would contest that you have like a golf swing, a throw, or any other very dynamic movement. It requires a high degree of flexibility to allow the movement to happen. And as a result, there's a high degree of motor coordination that has to happen to be able to elicit that type of movement pattern. So no doubt about it, when you start working with people and say they want to work on a golf swing, that's a lot different than somebody who wants to work on a bicep, okay? Now, as we take this a step further, when you look at physical wellness overall, and we can make this physical wellness, we can make this preparing to run a 100-meter dash, we can make this whatever we like in the middle, but with physical wellness, just in general, kind of what we're talking about with our class, you have cardiovascular, body composition as part of it, muscular strength, muscular endurance, and flexibility. I would also say that when you get into different populations, depending upon need and demand, you might even have balance and coordination can be added into here. But in general, you'll see these 5 main areas or domains of fitness, with flexibility being one of them. And flexibility has its place and has a spillover effect into, as you'll see, into a couple different areas. So the book lists these in terms of benefits of flexibility training, which I'm on board with. I totally understand these. I totally agree with these as well. You have this kind of greater efficiency of movement when somebody is not limited or bound by inflexible movement patterns. I think we can find any number of different articles regarding injury prevention in terms of being more flexible. And then you have these different imbalances, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on. We talk about ADLs, and you have people who come in who might be like short and strong on one side of the body and long and weak, if you will, just a broad categorization on the other side of their body, because they sit all day on a computer and basically they're kyphotic. They're rounded over and they're slumped over all day long. So I would contest that it's all of these 100%. And the book reinforces this, and they reinforce it in 2 different chapters. You look at this and they try to tie in relationship between low back pain and and flexibility that you see from the quadriceps, iliopsoas, psoas, and the back muscles. So I'm on board with this as well, but you're going to have people in the industry who push back and say there really isn't much of a relationship. And I can tell you, having trained, I don't know how many different people over my career, yeah, there's a relationship. Somebody comes hobbling in with low back pain, I go right to flexibility, and I do a lot of soft tissue work, and I focus a lot on all the muscles that cross that region of the body, because usually one of those is the culprit. And never ever I can't say it's like 100% hamstrings or psoas and iliopsoas, but I can definitely tell you it's kind of a triad between 3 different things that cause low back pain. So I oftentimes will go right into flexibility work. But I would also contest that flexibility work has its place in stress relief and relaxation. And when you look at like yoga or Pilates as a modality, or primal movement patterns as a type of modality, you can use these as a way to have broad-based calisthenic type exercises. And if you want to look at it on a continuum, like yoga on one side, primal movement patterns on the other side in terms of aggressiveness, but they all have their place in terms of functional mobility. And that's kind of what you're after when you start talking about yoga and Pilates and primal movement patterns. So let's take a moment to talk about functional range of motion and strength. And this is going to be very self-evident to some, and others, hopefully it's something where you go, oh, okay, I get it now. So when you look at somebody and they have this functional range of motion, this FROM itself in green, that's how far a movement can actually happen. So like a bicep curl, full extension, curling up, curling, and then elongating back down, right? You go flexion to extension and you go through a range of motion. You just in your head think of a bicep curl. So when a person does that, they are going through a functional range of motion, and functional range of motion is a little bit different than range of motion performed. I'm going to interchange both of them in this context right now. And when you look at range of motion, when the person performs a complete movement pattern throughout the entire functional range of motion for the joint itself, they can develop strength completely across the continuum in that functional range of motion. If, though, the person, instead of doing a full functional range of motion, does this and they have a shortened range of motion, they're going to end up with a lower strength capacity because they're not actually recruiting muscle fiber throughout that range of motion. Just think of somebody who does like a shortened bicep curl range of motion. They are not getting full extension all the way down. They're missing out on full elongation of the motor unit or the muscles in the motor units themselves, and they're not able to fully engage the muscles that are required for bicep curls, and so they're limiting their ability to develop strength. So a person who is limiting in their flexibility, or limited in their flexibility, they will be limited in their ability to increase their strength throughout a functional range of motion, whether it's one joint or a multi-joint golf swing. So often when people come in for golf swings and we want to go ahead and have a better, a lower score in our game, that's one of the areas we often go to. Sure, it's strength. You got to have some strength, but you have to have the fluidity of movement and the ability to articulate across several different regions of the body to be able to hit a golf club. Now, the actual getting the club head on the ball, that's the onus of somebody else who's a golf pro. But from our perspective, it's all about the mobility and strength components that come into play, and you try to increase the range of motion and the functional range of motion capacity to increase the strength capabilities and capacity. So really, you're trying to get this down to the ability to create as much force as possible through having a full range of motion to then go from a potential to kinetic type of environment. So you have all this stored energy to swing a golf club, you load and you go into the pre-swing, into the loading phase, and then you unload and you swing and bring the club head down. That's what you're after. You're trying to increase that functional capacity to deliver the force generated and make it force applied into the ball. Basically, it's all about yield, if you want to think of it like that. How much yield do you get out of the process? Now, the book lists several different factors affecting flexibility. These are pretty self-evident: joint structure, muscle connective tissue, and I'm going to go into fascia a little bit in one of the other presentations. Hyperelasticity, age, sex, temperature, physical activity, and resistance training background. All right, that looks more like it. We got the age on its own line. So the book outlines these, and some of these are pretty darn self-evident. So they know that when you look at static range of motion, they cite that one of the limiting factors of static range of motion is the actual structure of the joint itself. And they further suggest that it's pretty common to have above and below common range of motions in different joints, and they don't really differentiate. And I'm kind of miffed by this because, quite honestly, you can have people who have above common range of motion in joints depending upon their activity, even though we're evaluating the same joint. Now, you can also have above common and below common range of motion in different joints in the body because there are different types of joints in the body: anarthroidal, cellular, crooked, arthroidal, sorry, I'm stumbling on my words there as I'm trying to get to my next slide. But you look at the different types of joints in the body, and you can put these on a continuum in terms of their mobility and their strength. And we know this. We know as a joint itself has greater stability, it's going to have less mobility. And we know that when you have increased mobility, you're going to have less stability. Just look no further than, say, like the shoulder joint versus the hip joint, or the shoulder joint versus the elbow joint. Those each have different types of movement patterns and range of motions, but they also have different types of joints that allow the movement to happen. And I would also just contest real quick, as I said earlier, you have different activities and different people will have different capabilities when it comes to flexibility. All right, so let's take a look at this. Let's look at connective tissue. And if you've not figured this out yet, winner, winner, chicken dinner, you have chicken tenders, you have chicken tendons. It's a muscle that connects it's tendons that connect the muscle to the bones. So when you look at that, that's a sidebar to how I remember that before with chicken tenders. But you look at tendons, ligaments, and fascia, and it's a connective tissue that quite literally does it. It connects muscle to bone and bone to bone, and that's also an interconnected series of tissues throughout the entire body that is referred to as fascia. So this is just pulled from one of our books. You look at where the bicep comes down and attaches, the muscle comes down and attaches to the bone. This would be tendinous right here, muscle to bone. And you know the GTO is in the tendon itself, and that measures this mechanical receptor that evaluates real time how much stretch and tension is in the tendon itself. And it's a mechanical receptor that also is a protective mechanism as well. Let's go ahead and go into ligaments. So when you look at this is a knee joint, and you have anterior cruciate and posterior cruciate ligament. More often than not in athletics, you'll hear ACL tears. That's what this is. It's a ligament that goes from the femur down into the tibial shelf, and it helps provide stability within the actual knee joint. And just remember, ACL tears, anterior cruciate ligament. Ligament goes from bone to bone. Tendon goes from muscle to bone. So let's take a look at this in terms of the muscle itself, right? And the reason why we have to throw in muscle is because a muscle also has mechanical receptors in it, and those are muscle spindles, and they evaluate the rate of change and force that's involved in a movement pattern, and they act and respond accordingly to protect the muscle from being torn. The other side of this is we know muscle creates movement. Muscle itself is one of the things that also helps, oddly enough, in flexibility as an antagonistic muscle group. So to that end, I'm going to break it here, and we're going to jump into the next video. This will be a series of several videos you'll have on flexibility. All right, guys, thanks.